Thank you for calling Death Before Desk Job. If you are this week's guest, please leave a message and Paul will call you back once he finishes the intro.
Hey Paul, it's Mark Dean Veca. How you doing? Sorry about the mix-up earlier with the time, Pacific time, but I'm ready when you are. So let's do it. Talk to you soon.
Hey, this is Paul, and you're listening to Death Before Desk Job, the podcast geared towards creative people who are pursuing or who would like to be pursuing their creative endeavors to their heart's content. My guest this week is artist Mark Dean Veca. He's a painter from Altadena, California, and I am truly humbled by his presence on the show today because I happen to be a very big fan of his work. I could tell you right now where I saw his work for the first time, but we pretty much start the interview on that note, so let's not give it all away. But I am a very, very big fan of the work that Mark does, and I've been following him for a long time, and I'm truly humbled by the experience. And it all started because of an email. That email is the result of a conversation that I'd had with Michael McManus from episode 11. We had the conversation after the fact. I was saying to him, people seem to like the show. I like doing the show. Should I consider doing PR or something? And he just said, you could do all that, but you should probably just focus on getting the kind of guests that you want to have and go from there. It'll happen on its own, I think. And I took that advice. I gathered up all my gusto and I went to my computer and I sat down and nervously wrote an email for about an hour where I asked Mark the email didn't read at an hour in length, right? It just took me a long time to say something very simple. Just, how these things go. But I contacted Mark. I asked him to be on. He got back to me super quickly and said, let's do it. And once we got through this time zone debacle, considering this is my first trans time zone interview, we had a lovely conversation that I hope you'll stick around for. I am very, very excited, so I don't want to take too long at the top. So let's try to get through this real quick. You can find Mark's work at markdeanveca.com. You can also find him on Facebook at Mark Dean Veca Studio. And you can also find him on Instagram at Mark Dean Veca. That's MarkDeanVeca. I don't know why I always spell the name. I feel like you could just look at the phone or the screen. I guess I do it for people who are driving, but people who are driving wouldn't be browsing the internet. I'm sure, just whatever. I'm thorough. Anyway, check out Mark's work. And if you want to check out the show, you're new here, please go to deathbeforedeskjob.net. You can see episode notes for this and previous episodes. You could support the show through Patreon, through buying merch, through spreading it around, telling somebody that you heard this podcast and it was cool. And that really is the best thing you can do. Yeah, let's just get started. This is the interview with the incredibly talented artist and a personal inspiration to me, Mark Dean Veca. Hello, Mark. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you. It's an absolute honor to have you. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me. I wanted to just let you and the listeners know that I first got acquainted with your work in 2014 when I went to see a Primus run in Las Vegas, and you had done a poster series for all three nights. And it was Scrooge McDuck, Uncle Pennybags, and Hunter Thompson. And I was absolutely captivated by the work you did. And from that point on, I started following your work. As somebody who loves gig posters and music, it's sort of what I like to think is my wheelhouse, but you've clearly established yourself in that world. How did you come to find your work in that avenue?
In the gig posters in particular?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so that was something that, interestingly enough, that's something that I'd always wanted to do, but never knew how to sort of get into that world or how it worked, or, I knew other people that did that, like Tara McPherson, I know did a bunch of things, and other people that I know. And I always loved that stuff, growing up in the Bay Area in the 60s and 70s, that was all kind of in the air, in the water, that kind of psychedelia and that whole tradition and that and underground comics and all this other great stuff that was, influential to me, Rick Griffin, all that kind of stuff. But what happened was, so you mentioned that Hunter S. Thompson. It's the Ralph Steadman drawing that was for Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. A collector had commissioned me to do something related to Hunter Thompson, Ralph Steadman, all that, So I had kind of looked through and sort of chosen that particular image to do as a painting, because that's kind of, in line with what I've been doing for a long time, sort of taking these so-called found images and kind of filtering it through and my own sort of sensibility and sort of using those images or those figures as sort of a found composition, just within which just to improvise and do my own kind of organic stream of consciousness line work. So I had done this painting as a commission, and I posted it on Instagram. And then another artist, Mars One, I don't know if you're familiar with him.
I'm not.
He's based in San Francisco. He's a friend. He's a great artist and a really great guy. And I think he reposted it on his Instagram, something like that. And then someone who follows him, this guy Zoltron, he was running the Primus poster series at that time. He did that for a number of years. And it was kind of like a pretty amazing thing, especially in retrospect, kind of what he did and the way he did it. It was really great for the artists and great for the band. And he really it was kind of special. I hope that someday that someone will do like a book on all of that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so he just hit me up and invited me and said, "Hey, would you be interested in doing a poster?" And like I said, it was something I'd always wanted to do. And obviously the connection was being Las Vegas and this Ralph Steadman drawing for Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. I think that's what made the connection for him. And then as it turns out, it turned out to be a 3-night run, like you said. And did you go to all 3 of those?
I was at all 3 of those.
Nice. Okay. Well, I was at one.
Oh, were you?
Yes.
Oh, wow. My friend and I wish we had bumped into you. We were drinking Dark and Stormies off to the right side of the stage.
Like off the right? Okay. I think it was the left where the bowling alley is.
We bowled one night, but we mostly hung out on the right side.
Okay. Yeah. So we were on the other side by the bowling alley, which is amazing. Really fun venue.
Yeah.
That was Brooklyn Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I went there with Mario, who, like I said, hooked me up with Zoltron, and also Brian Chambers, who is the guy who I originally commissioned the painting. He came out there too, and that was the first time I'd met Brian. Mm-hmm. And so we all met in Vegas, and just for that one night. I can't remember which night of the run it was, but by the time we got to the venue, the posters were all sold out.
Yep. They were sold out by the time I got to the table. I was trying to.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So those collectors, you gotta, listen, hats off to those guys. They are diehard and they are super collectors. I mean, they're really into it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of good posters that have been made. So Zoltron, he had a lot of experience. He's done a lot of posters and graphics and he's a great artist himself.
Yeah.
And so he was able to kind of walk me through this whole process. Cause I'm, first of all, I haven't really done that much in terms of printing and graphics and, all of the work that needs to be done in Photoshop to prepare layers and all of that kind of stuff. It's like, I'm kind of a novice. I still am, even now that I've been doing this, for 6 years or so. It's still the hard part for me, it's like doing all of that. And sometimes I try to, farm that part of it out as much as I can just to make it better.
Sure.
But yeah, anyway, so we chose, I chose these other 2 images for the run. Like you said, Scrooge McDuck, which was Rich Man, Uncle Pennybags, Poor Man, and then the other one, the Hunter Thompson, Ralph Steadman. That one's called Busted. No, there was Richmond. It was Lucky Duck, Busted, and the third one is Road Trip.
Road Trip, yes.
Yeah,
they were all beautiful, and I only bring them up because naturally your body of work is much bigger than these three pieces, but it's just how I came to know you and came to eventually love the work that you do. I did have a question. You did mention Brian Chambers was the one who commissioned you to do the piece of the Steadman Thompson.
Yeah.
You had done that piece, and then Zoltron saw it, felt it would be a good poster. Was there any sort of conflict or any sort of, well, actually it doesn't sound like there was conflict because Brian came with you to the show to see the posters. But as far as reproducing the work as a poster and selling it to another, buyer and having it reproduced in another way, was there any sort of?
No, and I don't remember, if I asked him about that or not. I mean, I think that I'm well within my rights to do that. I know it's probably a nice thing to do, to ask, but I just recently did something else similar, and I didn't ask. I just did it. But I gave, the original commissioners, I gave Brian 15 of those posters.
Yeah.
Which, in retrospect, I'm like, wow, that's a lot, because I only had 50 of them. But I'm I was so grateful to him, and I still am.
Sure.
He was very supportive of my work for a few years, commissioning a lot of work. And I love Brian. He's a great friend. So I sent him 15 of those, and now those are some, like I said, probably the most sought after ones. And we actually ended up making another print from that painting. But the other thing I wanted to say about the posters was that it was a really nice way for me to take existing work. So that was my whole thing, was I would love to do these posters, but at the moment I'm I don't want to start. I didn't know if it was going to be successful, if they were going to sell, any of these things. I didn't want to spend a lot of time starting something from scratch. And I thought, I have all of this existing work. And like I said, he wanted to use that image to begin with, so that was cool. But then I got to use something in the background. I don't know if you remember, but in the background of that, there's a pattern.
Yeah, the Baroque, the filigree, and all of that.
Yeah. And so that was taken from drawings that I had done in 2001, from a body of work that I pursued for quite a long time, and it just seemed to make a lot of sense in that context of Las Vegas and that kind of over the top sensibility. So Zoltron really kind of walked me through and helped me with those posters, and that's probably why the posters are some of the best ones, is because he helped me out so much on those, and some of the other ones I remember doing later on, it was left to my own devices, probably could have used an editor.
well, I mean, it speaks to collaboration being of great value. Do you have any other collaborators that you actively work with?
Not really. I mean, I do like the idea of an editor or a collaborator. I mean, I haven't really collaborated in a real collaborative way in the true sense of the word, where two people are making, have equal amount of decision-making power. I mean, I've worked with people, and in fact, even a good friend and great artist, Daniel Davidson, he's an artist in New York, and I lived in New York for a long time. We still are good friends.
Actually, I'm sorry. That's why I thought I knew you had lived in New York, and that's why I thought when we were trying to set this up, I called you at the wrong time.
Right.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah. I thought that might be the case. Because I think my Wikipedia still says I'm a Brooklyn artist or something.
Yep.
Yeah, that thing has not been updated in a long, long time.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. So continue. Daniel was
right. Yeah. So Daniel assisted me on some big mural projects, and I loved working with Daniel because, I mean, not only was he just a great assistant in terms of helping me do the work, but he was somebody I could bounce ideas off of, and I trusted him to make the work better. And I do like the idea, writers have editors, and people but most artists, you really are just working by yourself in the studio, and every decision, is yours. And believe me, I don't like to be art directed, but I do like to have somebody to yeah, just to bounce ideas off of, get feedback. We all need that. And I pretty much work alone, just me in my studio. And there's not like a big art scene, art community around. Well, there are a lot of artists around where I live in Altadena, California, but nobody sees each other really. And especially now, right?
Right, of course.
Yeah. And so, but it's, I do have another friend, Christopher Ford, who's great. I call him my consigliere. That's kind of the role.
Yeah.
We brainstorm and talk about things, and I can bounce ideas off of him and other artists who I know. And that's, I like being able to, it's not all just in my head, and my wife gets sick of hearing it,
Sure.
So I don't blame her.
Right. You said your wife is a musician. Does she dabble in the arts as well?
Well, she's not a musician per se, and she plays. No, that's all right. No, she does. She plays the cello a bit, and she played as a kid. But she's a doula. I don't know if you know what a doula is.
Yeah, that's a spiritual, like a not Reiki, but in that for
not
like not a midwife.
Kind of like it's not a midwife exactly, but yeah, she helps women before, during, and after labor, kind of taking the role of the grandmother in that situation,
right?
Kind of teaching and helping but yeah, she likes cello.
I got you. I see. So when you mentioned that, like, your wife gets tired of hearing it, I'd imagine I kind of have a similar situation. My girlfriend is not an artist. And sometimes, as you said, this can be a very solitary practice, and you get in your own head a little bit. And at least for me, I could say that sometimes I assign a lot more value to things maybe than when she looks at it, she just goes like, okay, cool. But I did want to bring that up because your process, your technique, it's very intricate and detailed. All this line work that you do, that clearly is a labor of love. I'm wondering, do you love the tedium of your technique? Is it designed to get lost in, or is it that you love the end result so much that you'll put up with the tedium?
Yeah. It's funny, yeah, because there definitely are different elements of the sort of the process. But no, I love the act of doing it. The tedium part of it is very meditative, and that to me it's like everything else is an excuse just to do that. Mm-hmm. I often talk about drawing in and of itself as being this sort of prehistoric magic, where you just take these basic, simple lines and create form and space. There's some kind of a magic about that to me that I never seem to get tired of. And so, yeah, it's just creating whatever these compositions are, whether they're on drawings or paintings or murals. It's all in the service of just the act of making those lines. And I can get lost in that for hours and hours, and that feels really good.
It looks like it feels good because it shows in the final product. Mm-hmm. And I read on that Wikipedia page about you that somebody had once said somebody who reviewed it had compared it to like the intricacies and the details of like I'm probably gonna say this wrong, toile textiles and like fresco painting, but it has like the immediacy of a graffiti artist, which is a pretty apt description.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you're mentioning the toile de jouy is the.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. No, that's just a French word for means canvas or fabric, and it was sort of that, like the pattern that I mentioned in the Primus poster background.
Yeah,
18th century French textile pattern, very intricate drawing style. And pattern. But yeah, what you're talking about with that was a review from one of my earliest big mural installations in Buffalo in 1998 at University of Buffalo. It was an essay written for the catalog, and he mentioned the the fresco painter versus the graffiti artist. And it's true. I mean, that kind of points to another element I think that is common throughout my work, is the sort of these opposing elements, right? I mean, that's a big part of it for me. So that being, high versus low, elegant versus vulgar, scale, large, small. I mean, just
Yeah.
all of these supposedly conflicting kind of dichotomies, which I kind of look for those things, and they also just seem to happen naturally.
Right. And I was going to point out the big versus small, because naturally you work in such small detail, but when you pull back, you have this big, beautiful graphic. And again, as regarding the immediacy of graffiti art, I can understand why that comes to mind, especially because so much of what you paint is pop culture. It's known imagery, but it goes through your filter and it comes out on the other side as something that's totally unique and special. One of the questions I had about that had to do with using that subject matter as the basis for paintings. And I was wondering if you ever found that you got resistance for using that content, like known characters like your Tony the Tiger or Super Mario, and using these characters. Is there ever any pushback for creating something that's already been, I guess, created, like rendering like a cartoon or anything like that? Because I know some people have that attitude about it. Has there ever been any sort of resistance in that department, and how do you deal with that?
Do you mean from the copyright holder, or?
You can open that up. Copyright holder, I would say I'm going to go ahead and guess on that's maybe a little less so because it's fine art.
Right.
But as far as critics even.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because most people ask me about, copyright issues, and I don't know if I can't remember anyone asking me about the other, just the general audience. What you mean, like people thinking that maybe it's a cop out or something?
I don't really know. I guess in my experience, I do. So just to kind of clue you in, some of my work, you can't see it on the wall, but I have some portraits that I've done of celebrity faces and stuff like that that are done with spray paint. I cut stencils and they're kind of line based. Mm-hmm. And some of my friends who are some of my worst critics have pointed out that's like, well, that's not really like your thing. And, I sort of meet this resistance sometimes, and it makes me doubt what I'm doing, even though I feel in my heart that I'm adding something to it and I'm bringing something out of it. So I was wondering if you had ever experienced that in using a pop culture image, if you've ever met that resistance from somebody, and if you've ever had to address it.
Not much. I mean, I know that there have been, I kind of feel like there have been a few comments over the years, people thinking that what I was doing wasn't, a quote unquote original. But I think, because believe me, I mean, I think about that stuff too, because there is, you are obviously gaining some kind of currency from that known image, which is something that pop art has always done, that's a big part of it. But I feel like, if you're taking something and making it your own, that's cool. I mean, then, yes, you're adding to it, changing it. And this sort of the known part of it is kind of a bridge to, it's a bridge or a hook, right? To bring people in and they recognize it. And then you can draw them in further into what you're doing. That's kind of the way I see it. And, the other part of it for me is that, whenever I choose an image, it's, I'm not choosing things at random, Sure. It's there's a lot of thought that goes into what I'm doing and why. And for me, the image has to have some kind of a personal as well as universal appeal. Like there has to be a personal connection
Sure.
with me. It's not just like, oh, that's a popular thing, I'll do that, Mm-hmm. And then also, there are other, aesthetic choices as well. There's a number of criteria that I would use to choose an image.
Would you be willing to go into perhaps something that you had a personal connection to, and maybe what that criteria was for that particular project? Is there a subject that you've done in the past that you have a great fondness for, and maybe you can kind of let us into why you chose that?
I think, well, I mean, I could sort of talk about any of the images in that way, because like I said, they all have a personal connection. But I'm just trying to think of something that maybe I've done recently. Right now, I've just been working on these logos in the studio, and I'm really using this time, during the pandemic, just to do stuff without any kind of regard to showing it, selling it, anything. I'm just doing whatever I want to do. And I mean, obviously you always have to keep the audience in mind as well. Right. But,
Yeah.
but it's allowing me freedom to do whatever I want to do. And I'm not worrying about it, because I'm not planning on having a show, anytime really in the near future, because just everything's closed.
Yeah.
But so anyway, so the most recent, logos that I did this one, Led Zeppelin, the Zoso,
Yes.
Jimmy Page's symbol,
Mhm.
which supposedly is not even a word. It's just a symbol, but it looks like it spells the word ZOSO. And so that's something that is visually appealing to me, just in the way that the shapes and forms of the letters. And I feel like it has a resonance to me. It stands for, obviously, Jimmy Page, but it also Led Zeppelin, a band whose music, they're one of my favorite bands ever,
Mhm.
if not my most favorite band. But it also somehow has a resonance, for me, in terms of my youth and a certain time in my life, and maybe being in high school. And it also has I think there's just sort of a deeper meaning behind the whole thing in terms of culture and what it stands for.
Right.
Do you understand what I'm getting at?
Yes, 100%. That you have an attachment to this thing, and I guess having that connection to it allows you to put the utmost care and attention into it, like what it deserves.
Yeah. And that's actually another thing that I've been thinking a lot about lately is, kind of getting back to what I was saying before, I'm looking for things. It's all an excuse just for me to do this drawing. Right. And
Mhm.
that's just all something to hang that stuff on to. It's kind of like an armature or some kind of a structure.
Mhm.
But there also has to be some kind of a spark of some kind of excitement, right? Like,
Yeah.
just to get me to pick up the brush, right? So a lot of times I don't, I mean, as a professional artist, I pretty much just I have office hours. I work, certain every day in the studio, and it's not, I'm not just doing it when the mood strikes me or when I get inspired. It's like you have to go in and work,
Mhm.
but you need something to get you out of the chair and pick up the brush.
Right.
And it can be the smallest little thing for me where it clicks and I go, okay, yes, that I can do, like that I can get it up for,
Yeah.
So, I think with an image like that, it fulfills all those requirements, and it is something that a lot of other people can recognize and hopefully, feel a similar way about.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. You need to truly love the thing you're working on, and if I'm a working artist too, certainly not on the same tier as you. Your career certainly spans a much longer time than mine, but yeah, finding the motivation to go and work on something can be a little exhausting. In my case, I do a lot of client-based work. My work often takes a backseat, and the reason I do that is so that I can be in the position it sounds like you're in now, where you find the thing you want to make, you make that thing, and that's your work. But I'm in that tricky position of I need to afford this. I need to be able to make this work for me.
Mhm.
So on that note, I guess I'd like to know, as much as you're willing to share, about the path to get to where you are, where now you have office hours, you go in, you work on the thing that you're passionate about, and then you sell this artwork and put it out there. What did that path to getting there look like? And was it always smooth sailing? Were you always sure that this was the technique that you're going to go with, and you just went at it full steam, or was it sort of a process of adapting and trying different things out? And
Well, so I mean, I can go all the way back to, as being a little kid. And, I remember specifically being in second grade and drawing, copying things out of books or, comics or something. And the other kids seeing it and going, "Oh, you're a good artist," and I'm like, "Oh, really? Oh, okay. Wow. Cool. Well, I guess I'll keep doing this, because it was getting a response. It was positive feedback.
Mhm.
And that's when I really started, using that as my identity as an artist. And then fortunately, my parents were supportive enough to say to me, from a very early age, that I should pursue whatever I wanted to do and not worry about making a living or finances or anything, because if I loved it, I would find a way to make a living from it, or at least, to do something I loved and not, do something just because I made money, so there's kind of those two angles you can look at it from.
Mhm.
So I continue to do my work or just to be, that was my thing. And then I went to art school in LA. Back then it was called Otis Art Institute of Parsons School of Design in sort of downtown LA.
Mhm.
And, and I got my degree, and that was all well and good. And then I got out, and it was, and that was 1985. And I didn't really start making a living from my work until probably 2001 or so. There was a lot of time there where I had other jobs and just, I did other things to pay the bills, but I always made sure that I had time to work, to do my work, and to try to show my work and to try to sell my work. And, yeah, it was kind of a long path, and it seemed, it's 85. I mean, I guess in retrospect, it doesn't sound like that long of going without, but there were a lot of jobs that I had that I really didn't like and didn't want to do.
Any jump out at you?
Any jobs?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, I did a lot of art moving and packing and creating and installation stuff, working for galleries in LA in the late 80s. And then when I moved to New York, I was a guard at the Guggenheim Museum
Oh, wow.
for a year or two. And then I started my own business where I was making candles
Oh,
and
interesting.
selling candles all over the world, stores like Barney's and Urban Outfitters and stuff. I've always had this entrepreneurial streak as well, because my parents had a retail store when I was a kid growing up.
Oh,
So
wow. What
that
did,
was
what was that store?
it was called the Wildflower, and it was a women's clothing store.
Okay.
And so I think that was probably an influence on me too. In fact, I just did some paintings of that logo for the store, which is more of a personal thing for me. I don't expect other people to respond to it the way I do, but it has a real resonance for me.
Wow.
But yeah, so I mean, that whole idea of buying and selling and business, I think it probably rubbed off on me in a way as well, which was helpful,
It sounds like it.
Yeah. And then that candle business kind of petered out about the same time my son was born, 1999. And then it was shortly after that I started doing the toile de jouy drawings, which, I actually have to say it was an influence from my mother-in-law, who unfortunately recently passed last month.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
Thank you. Yeah, and she, this toile de jouy pattern was something I discovered on her bathroom wall, and I sort of fell in love with, and I was like, wow, this stuff is amazing. And I was like, I have to figure out something to do with this stuff, and I finally just started playing around with it, and it led to something that I was doing for many years and became very successful for me as far as making sales and getting more opportunities. But also at that time as well is when I started doing the big mural installations.
Mm-hmm.
And there really, this was like I started doing the installations around 1996 in New York at the Drawing Center, and there weren't that many people doing that stuff back then. I mean, Barry McGee, this show that I was in New York was me, Barry McGee, and one other artist, a French artist named Tanya Moreau. And that was Barry's first show in New York. And that show kind of opened up it changed my career and my life as far as like showing me a way to work that I wouldn't have done otherwise.
Right.
And so kind of getting back to your question, I mean, that was another avenue, another sort of revenue stream in a way. Not that it paid a lot to do these installations, but it was something, so it all adds up.
It sounds like it does. I guess that was where the question came from. I was curious going in about this toile jolie. Am I saying that correctly?
Toile de jouy. You say toile.
Toile. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for sparing me.
No, most people just call it toile, so it's fine.
Okay. Toile. So this toile technique that you've developed, it sounds like there was like a watershed moment that happened much later. Like it doesn't sound like you had this technique right off the bat, that you sort of uncovered it after being a working artist. I mean, while holding other jobs for a long time.
Well, I mean, it's so the toile is not necessarily a process or a technique, aside from the fact that it's a particular it's more associated with a pattern or a way of printing.
Right.
But my work has always been related to line and drawing and linear and sort of cartoon. That's the through line with my work from way back in high school, throughout art school. It's always been heavily line dependent, right?
Right.
Drawing dependent. And I guess when I started doing the 12 pieces, it became more and more refined. So yes, I mean, that's true. It became more refined. And that's actually, when, I had this show of those drawings, and someone in the guest book mentioned something about Rick Griffin, who I mentioned before about the rock posters. And like I said, I was into all the rock poster stuff and underground comics, but I didn't really know who Rick Griffin was at that point. And so I started looking at his work, and now I realize, this guy was just insane, like as far as his technique goes, and he was amazing. I'm a big fan, but my work became much more refined in that way just from doing it, because when I did the first one, actually, it was kind of clunky, and I was using, acrylic paint and or these brushes. I didn't really, I was just sort of making it up. I didn't know what I was doing.
Right.
And it was a total experiment. And then I was like, wow, there's so much here. This is such fertile ground for me. And it opened up a new way of working, because before that I was doing all the, I had spent about 4 years doing the big mural installations, hadn't been doing, drawings and paintings. And around the time my son was born, I wanted to stop traveling to do these installations, be at home more. And I wanted to have work that wasn't going to be destroyed. I wanted to have things that I could show more than one time or sell. And so I wanted to, I wanted opportunities to be in shows, with other artists. So it was a matter of just sort of taking a sheet of paper and being faced with this blank sheet of paper, right? Which, a rectangular sheet of paper as opposed to a room like that I was going into and responding to do the mural installations. The rooms would always sort of give me ideas or dictate to me what to do to them. And having this generic piece of paper, I wasn't getting that. So having this basic pattern to work from, which I used that same pattern for many years, it just gave me, once again, this found composition that I could then just jump into and improvise within.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times I connect that with jazz, which, my dad was a jazz musician and my brother. And so it's sort of, so you have this structure, so you know where it's going, where it's going to end up, But within that, you can just do anything and everything you want. So I was just doing totally improvisational kind of line work, abstract. And then I would do really super rendered image from a photograph or from a cartoon, all these different pop cultural references. And in the end, end up with this overall pattern that from a distance, it looks like this 18th century French, Rococo kind of pattern. But you get up into it and there's sort of infinite different things to discover.
When trying to describe your work to people, namely my girlfriend and like my best friend who I was talking to about talking to you, because I was very excited. So I said, well, the best way I could describe it is if I had to describe it, because this is my clunky pedestrian way of saying it. I said it was like waxy and muscular at the same time. Like there's something it reminds me of tendons and it's funny that you said that you had experimented with candles before, because waxy is the word that I would use to describe the substance, the nature.
Okay, good.
So I definitely see that coming out in there. There also is a fairly psychedelic aspect to it. Was that just sort of a byproduct of being in the Bay Area where like the psychedelic movement had sort of made a big dent, or is that from a personal experience with that type of thing?
It's both, but I'd have to say it's probably more just from growing up in that environment, just because, that was the aesthetic, when I grew up in the 70s, and I kind of, and that whole rock and roll, graphic aesthetic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I don't know. I feel like there is also this weird expectation. I experienced it, and maybe you do too, that by virtue of the fact that you do make this kind of stuff that is far out, you make something that's pretty far out, that the expectation is, well, you must be doing this all the time. Or you must love doing that. And it's like, well, no, I mean, for me personally, it was the kind of, that was the kind of thing I did like once or twice. It was like, no, I can't work that way. I don't know how anyone could. Exactly.
No, that's exactly it. I mean, I do love mushrooms. I know I don't do it that much, but I don't necessarily get inspiration from that. And I don't necessarily, I can't work when I'm high in any way, know. But, it does, I do think, well, one of the interesting things about that and about more, I guess, probably weed, like I would never get high and work, but getting high and looking at something I did, that's, that is, you see it in a completely different way.
Positive or negative?
Well, both. I mean, sometimes I look at it, I'm like, what the fuck am I doing? Why are you doing this? What's the matter with you? I mean, because, because I get paranoid anyway, right?
Sure.
Because I'm paranoid. I'm like, wow, what do people think of me? What do they look at this? Mm-hmm. But then I don't think about, like when I do the work, I really try not to think about that at all, and in fact, I think sometimes if something is going in a direction that I think people might think is weird, I mean, I might lean into it just because I don't want to be constrained by that thought,
Yeah.
It'll be more like, oh, fuck that. I'm just going to do whatever I want.
Sure. As you should. And when you say, what do people think of you? I think you're incredibly prolific, and looking at your work is inspirational. I have tried to imitate you once, but I think that's how you learn, right? Yeah. A couple of years ago, I did a drawing of a Scooby-Doo, and I had him with all the lines and all the drips and everything. I tried my hand at that. So I also think you are a huge influence on me and me growing as an artist as well. So thank you for that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's really cool. I've never taught, I've never been a teacher, because I think that's just really a hard thing to do.
Sure.
But it's nice to know that people, get something from the work. And I've seen some people that I feel like maybe that they're imitating my work, and that's fine. I'm taking from existing artists' work and sort of putting my spin on it and putting it back out there. So it's a whole continuum,
Mm-hmm.
in that way.
Does it ever bother you? Or is it always flattering when somebody tries to bite you?
Probably sometimes, I guess probably on some level it does bother me,
Okay.
to be perfectly honest. But I think it depends on if they're making it their own, once again, that's the thing. It's like, and I feel like what I do is, it really is pretty unique to me, the way I do it. So I don't see someone really doing exactly what I do. So, and there's plenty of room for everybody to do, to do what they do.
Nobody can imitate your hand, and I do have a similar ethos that there's room for everyone. And it's beautiful that you can influence people, though, and you can do it without being a teacher. Although I will say that if you ever taught a class, say like on Skillshare or something like that, I would sign up. I would. Mm-hmm. Let's see. We spoke about some of your motivations, and you've definitely brought up some influences at this point. We've talked about your process, but we didn't really get into nitty gritty. You did say that you used to screw around with acrylic and you moved on. Or are you using like an enamel now? What are you using?
Oh no. So that was, on those drawings. I switched to ink on paper at that point early on. So and actually that, going back to that sort of subject, I was doing anything I could do with just these little brushes and ink and paper. So that was the original, so trying to come up with various mark making, just really trying to push it into all kinds of different areas, just for my own sake as well, just because to be repeating the same kinds of marks over and over again, it gets boring. So you just want to try to explore and do everything possible with the simplest of materials. And then I figured out a way to translate those from paper to canvas and acrylic, like acrylic and ink. So the color parts would be acrylic, and then I was using ink on top of that. And then later on, probably 6 years ago or so, 7 years ago, I figured out a way to just do it all acrylic. And so it was acrylic on canvas. And now I'm working on another material. It's commonly known as Yupo. That's the brand name, but it's a polypropylene sheet. So it's like a synthetic paper.
Right.
And I just love that right now because, it just comes in a roll. I can take a piece out, cut it, and just start working. Whereas with canvas, it was a whole thing about stretching it up, priming it, doing all these things. And it was kind of a roadblock for me, and then it also just seemed so precious that it made it so important that I couldn't, it had to be right. It had to be perfect, as opposed to being, well, if I screw it up, I could just start over again or paint over it. And with the Yupo, it can be mounted onto panel if you want it to be a painting, or you can do it as a drawing. Anyway, it's just more versatile. It's lightweight. It's all these things that for me right now, it makes sense.
I got you. It sounds like it is a smoother material too.
Very smooth. Yeah. So it does, like I said, it doesn't need priming. I like a really smooth, like paper-like surface.
Yeah. So
with the canvas, I had to prime it in a way that would take all of that texture out. And I figured out ways to do that. It wasn't that difficult, but this just, I think I started using this stuff, I guess it was a year and a half ago. I had a residency at the McDowell Colony in New Hampshire where I went, it's like kind of a cabin in the woods kind of situation where you go and just work. So I was just there by myself working for 5 weeks every day. And this was a way of I could just order this stuff, have it delivered there, work on it. Very easy to ship, roll up, ship it back home,
Wow.
So that was ideal for that situation. And as it turns out, it's been ideal for me lately too, because when I finish something, I can just roll it up and put it away and start something new.
That's awesome. Sounds like it keeps the studio more compact as well, if I had to
Yeah,
guess.
it's another issue. Yeah. Yeah.
So what is your workspace like? What is your studio like?
So we bought this house here in Altadena about 11 years ago. Part of the reason we bought it was it had a yard in back that was big enough to build a studio in. And I still haven't done that. So I've been working in the garage, which obviously has been fine. I mean, I can do pretty much whatever I want in there. It's a little bit more difficult, but I'm getting closer to building the studio back there now. And so hopefully, I don't know how long it's going to take, but let's hopefully 6 months from now would be amazing.
I'm pulling for you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
That sounds cool that you have the opportunity to build in that yard. That's wild.
Wow.
And working from home, I mean, especially now during, COVID times, but generally speaking, working from home is, especially if you have office hours, it sounds like you pretty much have that under control. Is it where you'd like it? You'd like to spend more time on one end of the fence as opposed to the other?
I think it's pretty good right now. It's pretty dialed in. I mean, I could be out there. I was thinking about that today. Seems like my most recent routine is kind of maybe getting into the studio like around 11 and stopping at 6 and doing that like 6 days a week. I mean, I get up really early because I wake up. I can't sleep late anymore for some reason. But I have this whole routine in the morning, and I do a little bit of writing, and sometimes I'll hike for an hour in the hills over here, but there's also just, the New York Times and all that stuff online.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so that works out really well. And especially now, I mean, our son Luca he's in college. And so that changed a lot. I mean, before that, there was the whole balancing act of that and juggling schedules and all that. So now we are, I have much more freedom in that way. But the thing is, like I've always said, it's like you have to be in the studio to do anything, even if you're, and that's the thing, like, even if you're not doing anything, you have to be in there.
Yeah.
So that was always for me that the trick is kind of like, okay, I never had a full-time job really. Any of those other jobs that I had in the past were always part-time because I wanted to make sure I didn't have any excuses about not working. So I would be in the studio, whether I was making something or not. And then eventually, you'll get bored enough or whatever to do something, or something will come up and you're there and you can do it. So the balance is good. And my son and I are actually working on, I've been doing prints, a lot of prints this summer. We just, he's more into like the fashion and streetwear. And so we produced a t-shirt that we just released yesterday.
Oh, very cool.
It's Grateful Dead, kind of a riff that I did on a album cover, Grateful Dead album cover. And in fact, that's another instance of me taking an existing painting that I did 5 years ago as a commission for a collector and turning it into a print.
It comes full circle. Yeah.
And I didn't ask him permission, but I sent him one of the prints and I'll send him a shirt, and I think he's happy.
I did see that print and it was a gorgeous steely. I didn't realize you were doing this with your son. That's very cool that he's into that world. That was actually, I was going to interrupt you and ask what Luke was into, if he was going to follow in your footsteps a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, he was always more into sports. He was really into soccer for a long time, and he was more of a musician. He played guitar, and he kind of got into the fashion and streetwear maybe towards the end of high school. And yeah, that's what he's studying now. He's about to graduate this spring from Cal State Long Beach, and he's working for a store called Bodega, downtown LA, really great streetwear retail store. So yeah, I mean, it's been fun, to work on this project together, kind of gives us opportunity to be in touch more.
Yeah, it sounds like a great way to bond. That's super cool. Mm-hmm. I want to be mindful of the time, and I just want to Well, I have a question for you before you go.
Mm-hmm.
The last thing I usually touch on is general advice. And I'll say platitudes are okay. But as far as somebody who is an artist who's enjoying what they're doing and wants to perhaps get their work out in front of people, much like you do, getting into galleries and making a sale and really living the life of a working artist.
Mm-hmm.
What would you propose to somebody as necessary steps to make that happen for them?
Yeah, that's tricky for me because it's first of all, because it's been a while since I was in that position and things have changed so much.
Sure.
From when I was doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the day, it was about sending your slides to the galleries. I don't know what people do now as far as galleries, do you
I'm
send
sure
them
it's an email or a PDF or something.
Right. I mean, and it's a similar thing, just different form. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But I still think that those, I do see on some gallery websites, we're not accepting, unsolicited, email submissions, whatever. But what I would say is, which probably hasn't really changed. Okay, well, obviously there's social media. That's new, and we all know about that, and that's something we all do, and it's become a huge part of getting your work out there. But I think maybe more importantly is to go and just to spend time with other artists and to meet other artists and to share your work with other artists and to go and see their work, exchange studio visits. Building that kind of a network to me is really important. I really do think it is hard to, especially in the beginning to sort of work in a vacuum. And it is, and it's not easy for a lot of people, that sort of more social aspect of it. And I know that right now, none of that's happening, but I remember, so going back to what I was saying before about that period of time when my work sort of took off around 2000. So my son was born right at the end of 99.
Mm-hmm.
And before that, I would go to these art openings in New York. And of course, my wife would go with me because we were married and we wanted to be together, and she wanted to go. And it always felt a little bit weird and uncomfortable because I wanted to make sure she was happy and she wasn't bored.
Yeah.
So I would sort of feel like, sort of beholden, and rightly so. And then, so anyway, getting to the point of it is that when our son was born, she would stay home with him,
mm-hmm.
and I would go to the openings by myself. And that was actually so much more productive for me because I didn't, I could go all the way across town and spend 5 minutes at one thing and say, okay, there's nothing going on here. I'll go to the next thing. And then, I didn't have to worry about someone being exhausted by all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And I could just go and hang out and talk to other artists. And I think, and actually it was very good. That whole social part of it for me at the time was great.
Right. As you said, the form in which we interact with galleries is different. It's not slides anymore. It's emails or whatever it may be. But is there any sort of just general advice in terms of finding it within yourself to feel just being confident enough to go out and engage, or anything in that department? Because I'm sure that's always going to be a thing for people, is just feeling like they're not eligible or that their work isn't good enough or whatever the thing may be.
Yeah. I mean, it is. Well, that's the other thing. I would always struggle with that. Oh yeah, that was okay. That's a good point. So even back then, when I was going to these openings and I would go and I would be so nervous and uptight about oh, I should say something. Who should I talk to? Should I talk to the artist? Should I talk to the dealer? What should I say? And at a certain point, I stopped doing that and just decided to go and just, kind of enjoy myself and not try to force anything to happen. And that's a much better approach, because I was not the kind of person that was just going to walk up and shake a hand and introduce myself to, and do the whole schmooze.
Right.
And if that's the kind of person you are, fine. But if not, just be there and let things happen. That's probably a better way for me.
That's very solid advice. Especially because you could be, I don't know, some people, they have to psych themselves up so much to be the, hi, how you doing? They have to be the handshake guy, that it comes off as disingenuous, and it just ends up being kind of slimy.
Exactly. And it also kind of relates to what I was saying about being in the studio, right? You have to show up, you have to be there.
Yeah.
Nothing will happen. If you stay if you stay home, you don't go out, then you're not going to, and it's about the networking and meeting people and then creating this community, and then that builds, and that's very helpful. The other thing, I just would mention is that there are some things that recently that I listened to a lot of audiobooks and things in the studio.
Mm-hmm.
So the one thing I'm listening to right now, I don't know if you're familiar with Seth Godin.
Did he write Real Artists Don't Starve?
I don't think so.
Who am I thinking of?
Maybe, but he just came out with a book called The Practice, and I'm just in the middle of that right now, and it's really great. I like him a lot. I listen to his podcast. It's called, what's it called? I can't remember what this podcast is called.
I don't want you slinging other podcasts on my podcast anyway, Mark. I don't want to. No, it's fine. Seriously, what's it called?
I can't. Well, Akimbo? I think it's called Akimbo.
I'll look it up, and I'll put the links to this and the book in the show notes and stuff.
Practice. So he's great about all of this kind of stuff. And then another book was written by Jerry Saltz, who's a famous art critic. He came out with a book, I think it's just called How to Be an Artist, recently, that I thought was really spot on. It's really interesting. I mean, because Jerry's a great writer, and he was an artist. He started out as an artist, and I love his writing about the subject of making art and being an artist, especially. Mm-hmm. And he seemed to be spot on about so many things, exactly kind of the stuff that I'm talking about being there, showing up, doing the work, and he's good.
That sounds like a great read. I'm gonna post that and make sure to share it, and I'm going to try to check it out myself. Yeah. Any other loose ends? Anything you wanted to mention that maybe you didn't talk about, or anything?
Well, I just wanted to mention. So I mentioned my wife, but I didn't mention her name.
Oh, sure.
I just wanted to say Lauren Veca. Shout out to Lauren. I love you. And she's been really instrumental in my ability to do all this as well. And I pretty sure I mentioned that to her recently. But I mean, she's been there throughout all of this. Mm-hmm. And she actually had enough faith in me in the beginning, which is a pretty big leap of faith, because like I said, I was a guard at the freaking Guggenheim when we met, and, between the two of us and doing all these things together, raising our son and building a life, it's really hard to do it alone, I think. And I think that, interdependency is a higher value than independence. And so that all helps. Oh, also one other thing, going back to something else you said about advice to artists and how to get their work out there. I think one of the things for me also back in the day, I was reading Deepak Chopra was really popular at the moment. Yeah. And one of the things that he said was, whatever it is that you want, give that to other people. And so I wanted to be in shows. So I opened a little gallery in my studio, and I started showing, we had a few shows where I had these big group shows, and I showed a bunch of other artists. Mm. And I think that's a really good way to build your network, but to give what you want, give something to someone else. And it hopefully, it will come back to you.
That's a beautiful sentiment. Mm-hmm. And it's important to, I think, give more than you take. And that could be a fine line, especially because you have to look at, it's like self-preservation and worrying about being able to do it. But at the same time, if you're just taking, then it's, I feel like as soon as you start giving back to your, community or to your audience or whomever, things start changing a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mark, I want to say thank you so much for talking with me today. It's been an absolute honor. And that feeling you described of when you were talking about going to schmooze and being like, oh, I can't go up to this person. That's how I felt about emailing you. But I'm so glad that I did. And
me too.
It's an absolute honor to get to know you. And I guess I'll put it out there if anyone has any questions for you and they decide to relay them to me. I'll send them your way.
Great. Yeah. Obviously, I have all my social media stuff up and you can find me, and it's try to keep pretty current with that.
Yeah. I'll make sure to drop that I drop that at the very beginning and at the end. So,
Okay.
But if you want to say it, you're totally welcome to.
No,
I don't want to deprive you of the opportunity to say
not
it.
at all. Not at all.
Well, thank you so much, Mark. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks. Yeah, it was really fun. Thanks for inviting me.
It's pleasure's all on this side. Thank you so much. I'll talk to you later.
Okay.
Thank you for joining me, Mark, and thank you for listening. If you want to follow Mark, which you absolutely should, keep up with him at markdeanveca.com, MarkDeanVeca.com. You can also find him on Facebook at Mark Dean Veca Studio and on Instagram at Mark Dean Veca. If you liked what you heard today, you can check out deathbeforedeskjob.net. You can get episode notes for this and previous episodes. You can subscribe, rate, follow, support, all that good stuff. And I'm just kind of processing the fact that I had this interview. This is so cool. And I'm so overjoyed. It's really surreal, but I'm very inspired, and I have some things to think about. I've got some names to look up. I've got books to read. I've got some work to do. I'm driven. I'm going to go make something. I hope you are too. Until next week, take care.